Okay, yesterday we looked at 9.1 and the overview of energy, where we talked about ATP as the energy molecule inside of cells and how the three phosphate groups are a little bit unstable. And when you release that last phosphate, energy is being given off. Okay, so this section is going to look at photosynthesis and overview, and it's probably going to be a long video, so I'll try to go through it as thorough but as quickly as possible. So we're going to talk about pigments and what role they play in the process of photosynthesis, what are electron carriers, what are the reactants, which are basically what goes in to photosynthesis, or what do plants take in, and then the products, what comes out of photosynthesis. So let's talk about pigments first. Okay, so chlorophyll and chloroplast. The chloroplast is the organelle in which photosynthesis takes place. Okay, and inside the chloroplast we have a pigment called chlorophyll, and chlorophyll absorbs light. Now, white light is made of a mixture of different wavelengths. In this case, it's Roy G. Biv. And maybe you remember the magical little elf called Roy G. Biv. Okay, and he comes out and makes a rainbow. But Roy G. Biv is the visible spectrum that we can see with our eyes. And red tends to have very large wavelengths. And as you go across the spectrum, Roy G. Biv, the wavelengths get smaller. So white light is made up of Roy G. Biv. Now, pigments are light-absorbing compounds, and I just mentioned that in the chloroplast, which is the organelle that photosynthesis takes place in, chlorophyll is the pigment that's found in plants that absorbs sunlight. Now, there are different types of chlorophyll. There's chlorophyll A that absorbs the blue-violet light spectrum, chlorophyll B, the red light spectrum. Chlorophyll reflects green light, and this is why plants to us look green, because plants absorb basically all the other colors of the spectrum except green and reflects it to our eyeballs, and we perceive plants to be green. Okay. Now there's another pigment that's involved in plants, keratin, the pigment found that absorbs blue-green spectrum. It tends to reflect yellow, red, orange light. So keratin you find in like yellow peppers or red peppers or carrots or orange carrots, but keratin is responsible for those colors in plants. This is a graph showing the absorption of light by chloroplast pigments, and you can see chlorophyll A and B tend to kind of absorb the short wavelength and red, and then we have the keratins, or the carotenoids, that absorb different spectrums. Okay, so we're going to be spending a lot of our time today in this structure right here, which is part of the chloroplast. So we are in the leaf, and if we zoom in, this is the plant cell, there's the nucleus, the rough ER, and these are chloroplasts. And if we zoom in on this is an entire chloroplast, and so we're going to kind of walk through the anatomy of this chloroplast. So chloroplast organelles that are found in plants where photosynthesis occurs, we have an outer membrane, an inner membrane, we have thylakoids, and with thylakoids we can make grana, and then the stroma. So I think on the next slide here, actually, you know what? I think I can just paste a picture here for you and zoom in. Whoop. All right. So here we go. So this is the chloroplast. This is our outer membrane, the inner membrane, the thylakoid, these coin-shaped areas where chlorophyll is contained. And when you have a whole bunch of thylakoids stacked on top of each other, we call it a granum. And then outside of the thylakoids, this fluid that's in between the inner membrane and the thylakoids, we call the stroma. So there's the thylakoid. This structure right here, you have a bunch of thylakoids, is the granum. And then the fluid that fills the inside of the chloroplast is the stroma, and this membrane is called the thylakoid membrane. And here we have the outer membrane and the inner membrane. So how does chloroplast collect energy? Well, remember, we have to go back to our pigments. Pigments are molecules that absorb sunlight. So chlorophyll absorbs sunlight, and it's going to transfer this energy to its own electrons. And we're going to use these electrons to make sugar from carbon dioxide in water. So each chlorophyll molecule kind of acts like an antenna. Okay, so this is a chlorophyll molecule. Here's a photon of light, and it's going to excite some electrons. And these electrons are going to get passed from one protein or enzyme to another through a series of, like, I don't want to say chemical reactions, but they excite other things. So we call this like the antenna complex. These are the chloroplasts, and they kind of work together and bounce pigments, if you will. No, that's not what I wanted to say. This is a really bad picture. I'm just going to move on to this one. So this is chlorophyll, and you can see that it absorbs visible light and will excite electrons. And with the electrons and carbon dioxide and water, we can get oxygen and glucose. Tomorrow's lesson is going to focus a lot on light-dependent reactions. Okay, so we're still inside the thylakoid here. Here's light, and we're going to excite some electrons. So what carries these electrons? Well, molecules called electron carriers. They are needed, okay, because chlorophyll can be pretty reactive. Okay, so the definition of an electron carrier from your book: a compound that can accept a pair of high-energy electrons and transfer them along with most of the energy to another molecule. So one example of electron carrier found in the process of photosynthesis is NAD+, which stands for nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate, which, as you can see, is a total mouthful here. So we're just going to call it NADP+. Now, NADP+ is empty. It's not carrying any electrons. But when it does pick up 2 electrons from the excitation from a photon, it becomes NADPH. So it can hold 2 electrons and something called a proton to become NADPH. And this means that, hey, it's carrying these high energy electron carriers to allow us to do work. I felt in this figure in your book. It's like, it says, you wouldn't carry hot coals in your hand, would you? So imagine that these hot coals here are the electrons. Yeah, you wouldn't, because it would burn your hand off. So we need something to carry these hot coals. And why do you are carrying hot coals? I don't know. But here's our electron carrier, NADP+, which is basically the frying pan. And then our 2 electrons in the photon are the hot coals, and they're going to carry it, okay? Notice that it becomes NADPH, and it does have the ability to be converted back to NADP+, and drop off those electrons and protons somewhere for them to do some more work. Okay, moving on to an overview of photosynthesis. So now that we've talked a little bit about pigments and how they absorb sunlight and an electron carrier, let's talk about the chemical equation of it. So photosynthesis, if we just look at the words, okay, carbon dioxide, the gas that we breathe out, water, with a little bit of sunlight, they enter the chlorophyll and they can produce glucose, also known as sugar, and give off oxygen. This is the gas we breathe in. So reactants are things that go into a process, and products are things that come out. Reactants are always on the left-hand side of the arrow, products are always on the right-hand side. This is the actual chemical equation. 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, CO2, plus 6 molecules of water, H2O, enter a plant with some sunlight, and they go to the chlorophyll, and what comes out is, this is the sugar, C6H12O6, plus 6 molecules of oxygen gas. Photosynthesis, when you break down the word, photo means light and synthesis means put together. So with light, we're going to put something together. In this case, we're going to make sugar from light and gas and water. Crazy. Okay, so with the word photosynthesis, okay, the photo part means we need light. And so in this half of the picture, we're going to call light-dependent reactions. This is where we're going to capture light and create a little bit of energy. You can see we're going to make some ATP as well as some electron carriers. And these molecules are going to be moved on to, we're just going to say light-independent reactions, reactions that don't depend directly on light. This is where sugar is going to be made. So this is the light capturing part, and this is where sugars are going to be made. Notice that in order to make sugars, yeah, we do need some energy, and we do need some electron carriers as well as a proton or H+. And these 2 molecules are going to get converted back to NADP+ and NADPH, and they're going to go back to light-dependent reactions to pick up, some electrons. And it makes a little bit more energy So you can see that it's very cyclic. They're going to go back and forth between each other. So photosynthesis has two stages. The light-dependent reactions. Okay, this takes place in the thylakoids. The whole purpose of the light-dependent reactions is to absorb light and transfer it. So reactants for this, we're going to need some water, and I'll explain that in a little bit here. We're going to need some light, and we're going to need an electron carrier, NADP+, and NADPA, or sorry, NADP. Whew. What we're going to make from this is oxygen, our electron carrier, NADPH, as well as energy, ATP. So the steps are kind of simple here. Water splits from sunlight, and it's going to donate electrons to the chlorophyll. Pigments, like chlorophyll or carotenoid, they're going to use energy from the sun to add phosphorus to ADP to make ATP. The electrons that came from when water splits are going to be transferred to NADP+ and become NADPH. After the water splits, oxygen is going to be produced. So that's how all of these reactants are used to make these three products. Here's my ATP, here's my NADPH, and there's my O2. Don't worry, if you're looking at this and you're like, what? In fact, I have a model, and we're actually going to go through this model tomorrow in class. Okay. So when I go back to this original diagram that I showed you, we're missing some reactants. What are they? Because really they're just showing us ADP and NADP+. Okay? Should be saying, hey, we're missing some light. What else does a plant take in? Now I'm going to sit here and search and find all the other ones. We're missing oxygen that comes out. I guess it's not going to pop up. Okay? We're missing, so let's go back to reactants. So we're missing light. We're missing water. What other product is being produced? Oxygen gas. Okay? So I counted for NADPH, ATP, ADP, NADP+, but we were missing water, light, and oxygen. So water and light go into the thylakoid, oxygen comes out. Okay, the second stage of photosynthesis is the light-independent reactions. We're going to absorb carbon dioxide to make sugars. This takes place in the stroma, which is the fluid outside of a thylakoid, but we're still in the chloroplast. And the reactants, what goes into this? Energy, our electron carrier NADPH, and carbon dioxide. Our products are going to be ADP, NADPA, NADP+, and sugars. So steps here, a little bit more simple, or less simplified here, more simplified. Carbon dioxide is absorbed, NADPH and ATP are used to make sugars. So that is a pretty simplified equation. Okay, but we're missing a reactant. What is it? It's CO2 gas. Cool, it's not there. Okay. What other product is produced? Comes out? Sugars, glucose. All right, now let's focus in between the light-dependent reactions and the light-independent reactions. What compounds are recycled between these two stages? You got it. ADP, NADP+, NADPH, ATP, those molecules. Okay. Now, critical thinking question for you. What happens if an inhibitor of light-independent reaction is added to a chloroplast, where we stop this process? What do you think is going to happen? I hope you're saying, geez, we can't make sugars, because if we stop this process, then we can't make NADPH or ATP. And if we don't have NADPH or ATP, well, now we can't go through light-independent reactions to make sugars. Okay, so, the cause and effect. What happens when you shut down one part of photosynthesis? Well, you're going to affect the other eventually. So that was 9.2, an overview. What role do pigments play in the process of photosynthesis? Well, they absorb sunlight and transfer that energy to electrons. What is the electron carrier molecule? That would be NADP+, and it carries 2 electrons and a proton from the light-dependent reactions to light-independent reactions. What are the reactants and products of photosynthesis? Well, plants take in water, CO2, sunlight. They meet up in the chloroplast, and they make sugar and oxygen gas. All right. Escape.